Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris Fluke here. Today we have podcast episode number 56, and we're talking about play here, man. Now, I got to tell you something. I never realized how important or how much value play brings into one's life until I had a child. So a couple years ago, my daughter had her second birthday, and up until that point, your kid is 0 to 2. You're doing some stuff like they're laying on their back, you're playing with them, tapping them in the belly and all this other stuff. Well, at this age, there were some older kids there, some of her cousins and all this, and we set up all kinds of stuff. It was at my old gym, man. We had the boxes up, balance beam, things to jump, climb from, mats to roll on, and all this stuff, right? So for the first 20, 30 minutes, kids are doing their thing, and then eventually, somehow I get tied into this. And next thing you know, 90 minutes, 2 hours later, I just spent the entire birthday party just roughhousing kids, and I was like, whew, that was a good party. I had a lot of fun. Number one, it was obviously playing the whole time, but number two, I was like, man, I didn't even have any kind of adult conversation, the usual, hey, so what do you do for a living type of deal. Had so much fun, and I got thinking about this, man. I was like, this little kid, this little daughter of mine is bringing some joys into my life that I never really expected. So as we get involved in this podcast here, we're going to talk about a wide variety of things. One, how do the benefits of play, obviously, for young kids, the detriments of play deprivation, the negative effects that occur to children that are deprived of play are pretty outstanding. And I started with the reading the work of Stuart Brown a couple years ago, and this man started, his line of work was working with these violent criminal offenders, and one thing that he realized when he was working with these individuals is that they really lacked a strong play environment growing up, all right? And we're going to get to the why behind that later in this episode. We're also going to talk about how to, how we as adults can incorporate play into our everyday life. So, when we get started with, when we start thinking about any topic, when we start talking about any topic, it always kind of goes back to Charles Darwin's, adaptation model where, for example, certain animals will adapt to survive longer, right? The reason that they survived was because of their adaptation was a valid adaptation for the environment that they're in. For human beings, why do human beings play? We're not exactly sure where it fits, but when you start looking across the animal kingdom here, and we look at different mammals and, even mammals that play within species, and then these animals that play outside of their own species, play is almost a universal concept with any human or any animal. So I'm reminded of a story I heard, and also had a great picture. It was I think his name was Norbert Rossing. Basically, he was up in I think somewhere in Manitoba, which is Canada. And he saw some huskies pretty much outside of a property there, and they were chained up, and they were outside just kind of doing their thing. But all of a sudden, he saw a polar bear approaching. And as this polar bear approached, this photographer thought he was about to witness a massacre. But what occurred was something special where, the dogs started taking a playful stance as they were looking at the polar bear. Next thing you know, they're kind of playing around, they're nipping around. The polar bear rolls onto his back. The dogs are playing, they're having fun here. And now we're talking about two different animals out in no man's land where they're probably so socially isolated that they were just dying for some fun. And these two animals decided that they were going to kind of play and roll around together. I have two dogs, man. You see these dogs, and there's always give and take when these dogs are playing, where we have a bigger dog. Well, they're both small dogs, but one's about 25 pounds, the other one's about 13 pounds, right? So they're both Jack Russells. They got a lot of energy. Our bigger one, he'll roll over, he'll roll to his back, and he'll let him play around because, there's been some research done in the past where if that bigger animal, I think it was a study involving rats where if the bigger rat didn't let the smaller rat win up to 35 to 40% of the time, then that smaller rat is not going to play with the big rat. So that big rat needs to know, that big dog needs to know, that big animal needs to know that if I want to have some fun and play, I got to give a little bit, man. I can't just be bullying those small ones around, right? And these animals come to understand that. And I think humans also come to understand that. As we get moving here, all mammals possess a fundamental play system. That was the work of Jaak Panksepp, who's got some great research over time involving just human development and the adaptations involved in everything that we do from an evolutionary aspect. And then as we kind of moved our way from animals, we start to look at these hunter-gatherer societies. And, some of these societies that are still around today, the kids involved in those societies, they're out there exploring, and they're out there playing, and they're out there doing things because they know, those adults know, that if we let our kids explore at a young age, they might be able to figure out a way to navigate those rocks, or they might figure out a way to traverse that river, or they might figure out that, whoa, that plant right there is going to make me incredibly itchy. All of these things, they need to get out there and explore, because that understanding and that learning that comes with the exploration is what's going to allow them to be successful adults in that society here. You also learn how to work with others, like that give and take I talked about with the animals. There's also that give and take with humans. And as we continue to move on through the years, we've got the animals, we've got the hunter-gatherers. There's also some artwork here. Peter Brugel's got this piece of art that I came across this when I was preparing for a presentation. The year was 1560. The year that this art project was released was 1560. And if you take a look at this piece here, it's called Children's Games by Peter Brugel. If you look at this, we have these big circular rings that people are playing with. We have a guy being held by his hands and feet. I don't know if he's getting beaten up or they're just having some fun. We have basically what looks like kind of like a balance beam. It's like an uneven bar, but there's only one. One kid's upside down on it, hanging by his legs. The other one's flipping over it. There's people sitting on a railing. There's people sitting on barrels. Somebody's on the shoulders of somebody else. I mean, this is 500 years ago, and human nature, man, it's a part of who we are as beings, man. It's a huge area. It's like a center square, and it just looks like a huge party, and everybody's having fun. Now, as we kind of fast forward over the years here, that whole idea behind finding time to play has kind of been put on the back burner. And when we start talking about what is play, play is going to be engaging in an activity for enjoyment purposes, right? If the purpose outweighs the act, that is not going to be play. So when we look at athletics, we have these structured practices, and then we have unstructured practice time. Those unstructured times, that means you as a coach, you put your whistle down and you let these kids explore and they do their own thing, right? When I used to coach wrestling with this guy, man, great guy, great coach, Dave Stauffer, tremendous wrestling coach and a tremendous person. Dave brought this to my attention. This is 7-8 years ago, where hey, let's put some free play into this practice, right? So we'll put these kids in these different unique positions, and then we'll just blow the whistle and we'll let them play around. We'll let them roll around. Let's give them 5 to 6 minutes to kind of explore some different things that they could do. Ways that they can manipulate their opponent a bit. Is this actually going to work if I try this in a match? Okay, it didn't work in practice. Now I know. And then you fast forward that concept to watching NCAA wrestling championships, and there was a local kid here in the national finals, scores at the end of the match, and they asked him in that post-match interview, hey, what was going through your mind there? And he said, that situation I practiced, this situation came up in practice while we were just kind of playing around, and I did something in practice. It worked then. I gave it a shot because that's the only option he had at that moment. He knew it worked previously in practice. He did it again. Again, another guy, George St. Pierre, one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time. When he's training for sport, he had play broken into it. And he's like, we're out here having fun. We're not out there to try to kill each other all the time with these sparring sessions. We're going to get in these certain predicaments. We're going to roll around in it. You tap me out, big deal. You kind of put your ego on the back burner, and you let the exploration kind of lead what kind of behaviors are done on the mat, right? Those kind of ideas are what's going to make you a better athlete, all right? And then if we're not athletes, if we're just normal people here, or we're trying to raise a kid, when we look at play and the development of, the processes, there's 5 different ways that I've come across that we could play. We have parental bonding play, which is like you have that little infant on the changing table, and the moment you look at her or him, you see their eyes light up. You let them grab your finger, and you kind of start wiggling your finger around. You see that big smile come. That stuff that you're doing there with that young child is going to really light up their brain, their prefrontal cortex, and over time here, you're going to be able to develop a pro-social brain here for your young child. As you move on here, we have movement and body play. As your kid gets a little bit bigger now, you have different objects. You have the square. Does that square fit in the round hole? No. Okay, let's not try to force it in the round hole. Let's try to find the square hole, right? that's a concept that we could always remember for the rest of our life, right? Don't try to put the square peg in the round hole, all right? Then we have different body play, different tumbling activities. We have this vestibular system. We have to get on the ground. We have to roll around. We have to develop this full system, right? After that, there's object play, right? With object play, it could be sports. It could be, on a balance beam. It could be on the monkey bars. It's just incorporating some other thing into the mix here as we try to develop our skill set and become a more well-rounded individual here. We have social play where you're working with kids. And remember what I talked about with those rats. Jordan Peterson once said, like, if you have a child, you want your kid to be that child that every kid and adult wants to play with. You don't want to be that child that bends all the rules, that cheats, that doesn't play fair, that whines when they lose, because nobody's going to ask you to play. And in the game of life, life is a tournament of games. The more games you're in, the more likely you're going to be successful, all right? So you want to create that child, you want your child to be the one that everybody wants to play with. You want them to play fair. Remember the rats, guys. If you don't let the other people have some fun, 40% of the time, they're not going to want to play with you. And what happens if they don't want to play with you? You don't have a game anymore. So, you're going to have to work with other people. That's what social play is. You teach kids that at a young age. And I got to tell you something. This whole year with COVID, it's over a year now. COVID-19 really put a hamper, and I'm worried about this with my young daughter and all the other young kids out there they missed 1 year of this development. And, over the course of their lifetime, or are they going to be a little bit set back, in these next couple of years, and they're going to have to play catch up as they advance through life here. And for some kids, maybe they don't get the opportunity to play catch up. Maybe they get stuck in that rut and they're not able to get out of there, and they don't have a support system that's going to get out of there. It's something that concerns me being a parent. And it concerns me as being a coach of young kids and old kids. You hear a lot of stories from parents like, my 5th grader doesn't want to get out of their room. My freshman doesn't want to do this. They don't go out. They don't talk to anybody. They're spending their whole time on their phone. All of this stuff is going on right now, and it's a little bit worrisome. And then the 5th part of the play thing is the imaginative play. I remember being young and you and your friends are creating your own little game, or you're in your bedroom throwing a football up, diving on your bed to catch it. You just won the Super Bowl, where that kid that's out on the basketball court, 3, 2, and he heaves up a shot. Oh, he missed it. All right, who cares? Let's reload it. I'm gonna do it again and take another shot or do this or that. That imaginative play. Like my kid right now, she's 3 and she pretends she's, getting a horsey out and putting their halter on and walking the horse out, putting the horse back in the barn, taking the halter off. She's doing all this weird stuff with her arms. We're like, Emmy, what are you doing, girl? She's just taking care of her horsies, right? That imaginative play is super important. And we're going to go, all of these things, we need that, right? We need the parental bonding. We need the movement and body play. We need to use objects. We need to socialize. We need to have the imaginative play. If we want to create a well-rounded child or be a well-rounded adult, we need to have all of these things in here. The benefits of play, right? Like we kind of talked about already here with the social play. We learn limits and boundaries. There's rules, right? We learn how to follow rules. If you break the rules, you're not going to be able to play. That's pretty much how it works, right? It creates that pro-social brain I talked about. There's some sort of innovativeness when we are playing. We're allowed to take the control out of the game as a coach or a parent. We let those kids go explore. They might innovate something that they never thought that they could do before. They might try a new move out when there's no stress in these low pressure situations. We let the kids do their thing, and they might find out that they could do something they never thought before. They learn, different things like humor and irony, like, oh, figures, that happened here. You're learning the ability to laugh at yourself, the ability to not take things too serious, the ability to understand that, again, life is a tournament of games. There's going to be an endless amount of games. You lose one today, big deal, because you're going to have another one tomorrow, right? As long as we win more than we lose over the course of our life, we're going to be successful people, right? And if you play, and one of the big things too that games and different things teach you as an individual, that if you play, you adapt to an inevitably challenging and changing world. The world is always going to change. So if you're exploring these different possible, avenues of change, if you explore these things while you play, when they come up in the real world, so to speak, you're going to be able to handle them. You're going to be able to keep your composure and handle them in a less stressful manner. And this stuff is not new, right? I mean, I found something that goes all the way back to 1896. Play. Learn social skills that will be useful during adulthood, right? Learning these skills young. We talked about it with the hunters and gatherers. They used, play and exploration to create successful adults. I think that's what we need to do here too. Now, what happens if we don't have play in our lives, right? Let's stick with the kids. Over the last generation, plays decreased 71%, right? One generation, play decreases 71%. There's been an overemphasis on academics and clubs and trying to build this resume so you get into college and go into the private school and playing this team and that team, right? That we forget about that free play, that unstructured play. Our family time is getting diminished. We live in a society now where both parents have to work. What does that do? Less parent and kid time, which could also mean less play time for those families, right? That's also an issue. We have the pandemic. This last year, a lot of parents that I talk to, this highlights this 1 year that we had, this 1 year of being on lockdown, really let us know what happened in this last generation with our children. It's like it was kind of exemplified and magnified, whatever the word you want to use, like tenfold. We have kids not wanting to do stuff, kids wanting to sit around, and the result of all this is obesity is up, depression is up, that victim mindset here where, the woe is me mentality or, oh well, can't do this, like all of that stuff is going to continue to exacerbate. Our coping mechanisms are going to be decreased as a young kid here if we're not out there doing these social, fun, playful things. And I'm always reminded of, if there's a lot of criticism out there with each generation, right, where the millennials are this or generation this we have an issue with that, blah, blah, blah. It's like with every generation, there's some issues here. But if we're going to blame that generation that's one behind us, who's responsible for raising that generation? We are. And I'm reminded of Frederick Douglass, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. We're responsible for the future right now and how we raise our kids and how we deal with the kids that we coach. Like that is what's going to that's going to define whether or not the country that we live in is going to be a successful one. And if we're going to be able to create an environment for these kids so that they could kind of explore and expand and innovate and do all these big, wonderful things in the future. But if we continually put the bubble around every kid and we don't let them deal with certain aspects of life on the playing field or on the playground or just with a sibling or a neighborhood kid, whatever, then we're just going to be creating weak children, and we don't want to do that because it's just going to set us back generation after generation here if we're just constantly preparing the type of individuals that we have here. So, just to stay with this theme here now, I kind of hinted at it in the beginning here. Some of the work that Stuart Brown, now this man is great. If you're interested in the play stuff, you just look up his work. He has some great TED Talks. He's got a nice book out here, which I think is just called Play. But anyhow, like I said, he started out working with violent offenders, and he's like, man, they did this life history stuff, and what they found was that there's not a lot of play. And when we start looking at this, if we really deprive children play in the first 10 years of their life, there's a ton of things that are going to happen to these kids. Remember Frederick Douglass said, right? Let's build strong children, then to repair weak, broken men. If we don't explore play in the first 10 years of life, we have diminished impulse control. We have less self-regulation. We have an increase in addictive predilection. We have decreased management of aggression. We have fragility. We have shallowness. All right? You look at all those factors here, that's a recipe for a disaster. Addiction is sky high right now with all kinds of, across the board, really, honestly, with all kinds of different substances. Decreased management of aggression. We have kids not being able to handle different situations. Fragility. Kids right now are as fragile as they could be. And, coddling and giving safe spaces are actually going to work in the opposite favor. It's not going to protect these kids from anything. It's just going to continue to compound and create a more fragile individual. Not to go too off topic here, but cognitive behavioral therapy, it's all about exposure therapy. And if we have a kid that is scared of a certain situation or anxious or stressed out by a certain situation, the answer to that situation is not to avoid it. It's to expose the individual to it little by little until they get comfortable with it. I talked about it before, but if you're scared of a tarantula, fine. Get into a big office space or a big room, and as a therapist, you might say, hey, I have a tarantula. I'm just going to put it in the room here for 2 seconds, then I'm going to take it out. Are you okay with that? The person says yes. 2 seconds become a minute. 1 minute become, whatever. You get the idea, right? 1 minute becomes 10 minutes. Next thing you know, you take the individual and you move them a little bit closer, and you just kind of keep repeating this process over and over again until that individual gets over their fear, right? So hiding kids, depriving them of certain things, including play, are just creating more fragile individuals, all right? And when we started, this is a bit of a stretch here, but no recollection. When we looked at those that committed a violent crime or committed basically like a driving under the influence thing, we had driving under the influence charge, vehicular kind of manslaughter and above type of deal, isolation, bullying, aggressive play patterns. This is what their childhood was like. There wasn't a lot of rough and tumble play where kids are learning boundaries, learning some give and take. It was just isolation, it was bullying, and it was just not a good, positive, playful experience, and it really hindered who they were as adults, right? And we got to remember something. Again, talking about some rat studies here. If you looked at, if these scientists deprived rats from rough and tumble play, those same rats were more violent later in life than they were, than those compared to the rats that were able to have rough and tumble play. And, there's some research out there that says if you don't correct some violent behavior by the age of 3 or 4, those kids are going to become, especially in males, young males, they're going to be violent males in their 20s, right? So if we don't nip this stuff in the bud, and if we don't allow these kids to learn these things at a young age, by playing games and by exploring different boundaries and pushing the limit and having these social, game situations here, they might end up being troubled adults, right? And when you are a troubled adult, it doesn't mean that your life's over and that you are a victim like we talked about here. And those that are deprived of that play growing up, they develop that victim mindset where, this didn't happen to me, so I'm this, or you know what I'm saying, and they don't try to work to improve. But I'll tell you this, man, every time that you have an opportunity to wake up in the morning, you have an opportunity to kind of make an improvement and be a better person. And if you are an adult, you just start thinking about all the people that you work with and all the people that you come across. How many people do you know that if you walk up to them on the street and you're like, hey man, how you guys doing? Think about what kind of answers you get. How many people out there just say, oh, I'm hanging in there. They don't have that life, they're not very optimistic. They got that stuck in a rut type of feeling. They lack vital life engagement. They just don't seem like they're all there mentally, right? They use escapist fixes like alcohol and drugs, or they have a personal sense of being life's victim rather than the conqueror, where they're not even willing to learn. They're not even willing to try to be better. Those that lack adult play often fit into this category here, where they don't seem to be all there mentally, man. They just seem to be disengaged. And that same, researcher Stuart Brown says, play could deeply enrich your adult life if you pay attention to it. If you pay attention to the benefits of, it's not just going out there and having fun when you're a kid too. This stuff just shows up over and over again. It's 2009 study shows, this is going into it's almost like the magic pill situation. If we are an adult and if we are feeling down in the dumps, if we do feel like we're stuck in a rut, there's something out there that could really change your life. 2009 studies showed that more time spent on leisure activities was correlated with lower blood pressure, lower levels of depression and stress, overall better psychological and physical functioning. Leisure activities, man, it could be going out for a hike, it could be trying a new yoga class, it could be going rock climbing, anything like that. Anything that you could do for leisure, man. Go for a walk in a new territory and you're going to feel better, man. The New York Times recently covered a study showing that increasing leisure activities improves immune function faster than stress can suppress it. Immune function, man. Where COVID-19 is running through this entire country. If we could boost our immune system by doing some more activities, we're going to be a better person, stronger person, healthier person, all right? And this pandemic's not going to affect us as much as it might that individual that's deprived of play, that sits in isolation and doesn't do the things that they need to be doing. The more you reduce stress, the more easily everything else falls into place. There's going to be no more stress eating, which is going to help us with weight gain, right? We're going to have better focus at work. We're going to be more productive with our time. There's going to be nothing really weighing on our mind when we go to bed. And as a result of that, we're going to get better sleep, and we're going to be able to make better food choices the next day. And we're going to be able to get up on time, and we're going to be able to do the things that we want to do, right? That's what it's all about, really. That's what life is all about. When we talk about play, the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. All right. If we want to get ourselves out of the rut, we need to get our bodies moving with these different leisurely, playful activities. And as we move on here, man, a couple years ago, the first time that I don't want to say the first time, but one of the really eye-opening experiences that I had is when I was in Milford, Pennsylvania, and I visited, I forget what that mansion's called, but anyway, Gifford Pinchot was the first conservationist, and he worked with Roosevelt. What was it called? Gray Towers in Milford, Pennsylvania. Beautiful town, beautiful hikes, beautiful everything, man. And so we go to Gray Towers. He was a Frenchman. He had this wonderful stylish place. And, you know, as we're there, they talk about his relationship with Teddy Roosevelt and how tight they were. And these two men would get out in the yard, they would box each other, they would wrestle each other, they would do all these fun activities. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I haven't done that in ages. I haven't just explored anything like that other than with my child. Like, there's none of that playfulness going on in my life. And I found myself into a rut somewhat recently, and I'm like, I need to get out, I need to get active, I need to get playing. And I swear, man, it's kind of an eye-opening experience, right? But going back to Roosevelt and Pinchot, these guys were trying to change the world. They were trying to preserve land. They were trying to do wonderful things for this country here, and they still found the time for play. So when you're thinking about how to structure your day, how to organize your day, you think about Roosevelt, you think about Pinchot, you think about these two men that were doing all of this great good, literally changing the world, and they were able to find time for play. I hope after listening to this, boys and girls, that you find the time, whether or not you're a coach, whether or not you're a parent, or whether or not you're an adult that just feels like they're down in a rut, right? Get outside, take on a new leisure activity, explore different boundaries, explore new limits, and just have a bunch of fun with whatever you're doing in life, man. I hope you guys like this one. Peace, everybody.